primary partnering institutions. I don't think it's a problem if you have additional institutions outside of the US that you also want to offer these resources towards and start to build, collaborative partnerships across all of them. But the application does require 3 letters from US-based clinical institutions. Jessica, anything to add?
And I'll just add from the review perspective, again, and this may help clarify maybe other questions that people have. Foreign components are allowed as part of the applications. And so this can include investigators that are at foreign institutions, or the applicants can propose some of the work to occur at foreign institutions. However, foreign institutions themselves are unable to apply. And the other thing I was going to add is that foreign components of U.S. institutions are also not allowed to apply.
Right. Whoop, there it is. Next question. We'd like to subcontract elements of the expertise support to individuals at the member institutions. Is there a problem with doing so?
I'm not sure I understand the distinction between member institutions versus partnering institutions. So it might be good to follow up with me via email to be more specific about that. Yeah.
Great. Or if maybe you left out something in that question, please rephrase it and submit it again. Thank you. The next question is, the center is to pursue externally funded research aligned with the NICH's strategic priorities for symptom management. The RFA also says applications must describe milestones appropriate for assessing the use and value of proposed resources, as well as the overall productivity of the REACH Center, including benchmarks for the total number of NIH grant applications submitted, scored, awarded, faculty, data. Any problem with our benchmarks also including awarded grants from other funders or funding sources?
Yeah, no problem with that. I think that'd be good to include. But again, we do want to make sure that there is, emphasis on pursuing NIH funding as well as other federal sources or other foundational sources as well.
Terrific. Next question. For a successful proposal, I'd appreciate a better understanding of what is being considered a competitive research intensive institution. For example, what if you have a clinical school, in our case, osteopathic medical school, embedded into a R1 university? Would that institution be a REACH recipient?
Yeah, this is a great question. So certainly an R1 institution would be considered research intensive. And so what we're looking at there are some of the kind of the strengths I laid out on the initial slide. Is, do they have, kind of a strong history of NIH funding? Do they have a strong Office of Sponsored Programs and research environment? Access to interdisciplinary partnerships, etc. Now, the second part of this question is kind of interesting in that you're asking about, you have an osteopathic medical school that's embedded within this research intensive institution already. And so certainly the research intensive, aspect could be a REACH applicant. But my question would be whether or not the osteopathic school already has access to all of those resources. In other words, why is the REACH Center needed? And keep in mind that the REACH Center is really about providing virtual resources to, institutions that aren't located like right within it. So I think you'd have to provide a strong justification for that relationship and that setup.
Great. Jessica, did you have anything to add, or I'll just go on?
I think you can go on. Yeah.
Okay, great. As a U-24 grant, it is unclear whether there is a primary investigator or a primary institution for coordination. Several times you mentioned a PI, and so some clarification might be helpful.
Sure, yes, absolutely. With U mechanisms, there is a submitting institution and a contact PI. There might be a multi-PI plan that is certainly acceptable. But yes, there needs to be a primary institution that is coordinating all of these activities as the REACH Resource Center. And the difference is that post-award, if your application reviews well and gets selected for funding, the NCCIH would then assign additional program staff to you to serve in this coordinating and assistive role. And so within the RFA, there's a section that outlines roles and responsibilities of the primary investigator, and then roles and responsibilities of NIH staff. And so in addition to your normal kind of program officer that's kind of tracking the progress and reading your progress reports and doing checklists and all of that, you also get a program scientist that gets assigned to work more closely with your team on an ongoing basis.
Great. Next question. If I heard correctly, an ideal applicant would include more than one type of clinical expertise / institution. So a group of osteopathic medical schools, for example, would they be viewed favorably in response to this RFA?
Right. So we do require actually that a breadth of clinical disciplines are represented. So an application coming in with letters of support only from osteopathic schools would not be considered responsive and actually would not be reviewed.
Jessica, this one's for you. Don't fall asleep. Can you clarify eligibility regarding the difference between foreign component allowed and non-U.S. as ineligible? For example, would a letter of support from a non-U.S. institution or PEDP that includes non-U.S. elements result in ineligibility?
Right. So as I said before, the foreign components are allowed, but what was meant by the U.S. part of that is that U.S. institutions that have foreign components, the foreign component of the U.S. institution would not be eligible to submit the application as the submitting institution. And as Lene said, they are requiring 3 U.S. partnering clinical institutions. However, more than that is certainly acceptable. Is that correct, Lene?
Renee's nodding yes. Great. Next question is, how do you define direct costs?
So a direct cost is a type of cost that's specifically identified as needed for a project or the resource center. So this can include like salaries, equipment, supplies, travel. That's kind of separate from indirect costs, which are reimbursed at a set rate that your institution negotiates with the NIH. And so indirect costs are things like keeping the electricity going at your institution. I would have to get into the grants policy language to get more specific than that. So hopefully those examples are helpful.
Thank you. The next question is, we're a new osteopathic school, and it was mentioned that the osteopathic institutions need to require osteopathic training for all doctoral students. We do not have any doctoral students yet, but the school is still new. As mentioned, all of our medical students are required to learn osteopathic principles. Would that qualify?
You know, I think this one might be good to have an individual conversation, and so that we can more closely examine your curriculum and the status of your program. So I would encourage you to please reach out to me at lene.mudd@nih.gov, and we can set up an offline conversation about that.
Terrific. The next question is, if administrative support is one of key resource categories proposed, would grant applications that the clinical institutions are interested in submitting to the research or clinical institution be
So
feasible?
I think what they're asking here, Anita, is whether the REACH Center could propose that their office's sponsored programs could submit grant applications on behalf of the clinical institutions. And yes, that is certainly one method that could be proposed with, setting up subcontracts and multi-PI status, et cetera. So that is a strategy that could be proposed among others. Yes.
Right. The next question is about partnering. Since most of the CIM institutions do not have NIH funding experience, can they find such an expert in a conventional medical school as a partner?
Yes, this is exactly what we're hoping to happen, is that actually the conventional medical school or research intensive university would be the ones that submit a REACH application, but they need letters of support from these CIH institutions that typically do not have strong research programs and support for research. And so our hope is that, that these different types of institutions are reaching out to one another. And so certainly I encourage you to reach out to some of the other institutions that are at the webinar today and vice versa to form these partnerships.
Lene, as I look at the next, and Jessica, the next question, I think that might be one that they need to send to Lene directly around allowable pay for partners and FTEs and such. It's a little grainy, I think.
Yes, what I would say is, just to clarify, we're looking for the partnering clinical institutions that they agree in their letter of support that they will provide 20% effort salary to their faculty to participate in the REACH Center activities. So hopefully that helps. And if not, please reach out to me and we can have a separate conversation.
Thank you. Next question. Can you please clarify whether a principal investigator applying for a grant who already works at an alternative medicine institution such as osteopathic medical school would need to get 3 letters from 3 outside alternative medicine institutions? That is, the PI's institution would not count as one of the 3? Please clarify that point.
That is correct. If you are proposing an application, you will need 3 letters of support from different institutions that would be your partnering institutions. Our goal here is that we're really setting up a resource center that is reaching out to multiple clinical, complementary, and integrative health institutions and supporting partnerships among their partnering institutions. And so along with that, we're also requiring that you include plans for how you would expand to new partnerships over time, because we really want to see these REACH resource centers kind of think about it as like a spider web or a network that they're expanding and reaching a wider audience over time.
This next question, I think, Jessica, you might want to kick off a response on. We're planning to apply with 3 institutions that are strong in their own specific areas, but we do not have a track record working together specifically. Will this be reviewed negatively if the plan to collaborate is well prepared and feasible?
I think as long as the plan to collaborate is well prepared and feasible, that and this could be used to convince the reviewers that it's acceptable, then I don't think there's necessarily a requirement that all of the investigators had previously worked together. Again, as long as you explain how well you could work together, I think that this would, it's not a bar in review, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Anything to add, Lene? That's good enough. It sounds like to me. Okay, this one is about pilot studies. This person needs clarification because they think they might have misunderstood some application instructions. Can you please clarify what you think about the role of pilots as part of the application?
Sure. So we are not allowing REACH applications to propose, funds to support pilot studies as part of the application. So if you do propose that, again, you would be considered non-responsive and you would not be reviewed. So we're really focusing on resources that help with the development and submission and conduct of externally funded, federally funded research. If pilot work is needed, that would be something that the the partnering faculty would need to look for ways to fund that pilot work outside of the REACH Center, right? So that might be institutional funds, it might be foundational funds, et cetera, to support the federal grant application in the future. Hopefully that helps.
So the next question is about subcontracting elements of the REACH Center expertise to individuals at the partnering institution. Are there any problems or concerns about that?
I would have questions about it. I think this might be something to discuss. The question is, I really feel that the REACH Center needs to be proposing how to provide resources that the partnering institutions don't already have. That's kind of the goal of the REACH Center. So if these resources already exist at the partnering institutions, then maybe the focus of the REACH application should be on other resource categories. But I can certainly see room for discussion here. So I would encourage the person to contact me to discuss more.
Thank you. As I'm typing to the next question to contact you specifically, because their question is very specific about their particular institution and aims. Will the webinar recording be available? Not a recording, but better than that, a written summary written by a science writer that does include the questions and answers that are being asked here. So you will get that and the speaker slides in about 7 days. So look for that in a direct email from me. The next question is a question about eligibility of the PI. Should they have obtain a doctor's degree, doctoral degrees, such as a PhD? Jessica's saying no.
I was trying to find my unmute button. No, I mean, specifically what the FOA states is that they should, any individual with the skills, knowledge, and resources necessary to carry out the proposed research as the PI is invited to work with his or her organization to develop an application for support. So PhD is not stipulated.
Right.
But I will say, in addition to that, is that, really in order to be competitive, the applicant should have a strong history of federal research funding. And so, that's something to consider in terms of where the individual's at in their career stage, that somebody without a PhD may not be reviewed strongly as the PI of a REACH resource center. Now, I want to make a distinction between that, the PI of the resource center versus a faculty who participates with the research center's resources. And so that's a different career stage.
Right. The next question, if one of the partnering institutions included a naturopathic clinical program and an acupuncture clinical program, would that agreement count as two programs or as a single institution? That is a great question. Well, all the questions are great. You all are asking.
That is a good question. I think, our intent is that you have 3 different institutions, not just 3 different programs. I'd have to go back and read how we wrote that language. Jessica, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it would be best to go back and look at the language here.
What I would recommend is we put the answer in the summary Q&A, and when you all get it, you'll have the precise answer that we've researched and provided for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you can't wait till then, contact Lene. Is the REACH Virtual Resource Center to be one institution, for example, university that is providing support to the partnering institutions, such as a chiropractic school, massages, etc.?
Yes, that could certainly be one setup. It could also be that a couple of research intensive institutions partner together to provide the resources to, at least 3 partnering clinical institutions. But yes, you have the setup correct.
The next question is, how do we know who's on the webinar to form partnerships? We really have these technical assistance webinars for you. And when you're competing against other, universities and things, we want to maintain your anonymity in the process. We haven't asked you to share your name or your information with regard to partnerships. Those are things that your institution needs to establish on its own networks. Do you all have anything to add to that question, Jessica or Lene, in the way I responded? We're not sharing the names of registrants of this webinar with each other.
Okay, so I would say, there are a few different strategies. If you are a clinical institution looking to find partnerships with research intensive institutions, you can certainly look at NIH Project Reporter to find research intensive institutions in your area that are doing research relevant to, complementary integrative health approaches, and perhaps they're planning an application. Another way would be to try to connect to different programs that have strong complementary integrative health programs, such as OSHR centers, and contact those types of institutions to see if they're planning applications. And then if you're a research intensive institution, certainly you can look up, complementary integrative health programs that might be in your area or across the country to try to find partners as well. So we can try to help you with that if you reach out to program staff.
I appreciate that, Lene, and I didn't want to give that question a short shift. I was just talking about the integrity of our webcast to you. The second one, next question is, do we need to indicate types of research and indicate the virtual resources needed?
So we are specifically wanting to support resource centers that will provide resources that support clinical research on symptom management strategic priorities from the NCCIH. So that includes basically any kind of human subjects research. The REACH resource centers should not be proposing resources to support basic animal models, that type of thing. That would not be supported. But in terms of, the types of resources proposed, you need to provide a rationale for why you're proposing those resources in light of the needs of your partnering institutions, which might include, these institutions are interested on clinical trials, or these institutions are interested in epidemiological work. And so, that might indicate different types of resources. It might not. So the key is to provide a rationale to, why you're proposing the resources that you are.
Okay, we're getting near the end of the webinar. I have 4 questions in queue that will be answered, but they might be answered pretty rapidly because we would like to end on time if we can, but they will be answered comprehensively. What kind of benchmarks are acceptable on the program, on the progress of the program?
So I would think about really looking closely at the 4 goals of our program and coming up with benchmarks that, kind of break down those goals into manageable steps and proposing from that standpoint. And certainly, if you want more feedback on that, you can ask to set up a phone call. Right.
The next question is, very few, if any, complementary medical schools can meet all of these requirements. Are there any plans to help interested organizations find R1 schools to partner with? For example, Bridge to AI is listed as an example here, provided team building workshops.
Yeah, thanks for this question. We are not planning to offer a specific team building workshop for this effort. So I would go back to the strategies that I just mentioned a couple questions ago, and also feel free to reach out to me directly.
Great. Second to the last question, are the partner institutions budgeted via subawards?
So not specifically, the partner institutions do need to provide the letter of support that they will be covering the percent effort, 20% effort for their faculty to engage in the program. Jessica, anything to add there?
No, I was just going to add that I don't think this is a requirement. And so other than what you said about the 20% in-kind contribution.
And I think this is another area we will definitely clarify it in the response that we put in the summary that will be sent to you. Last question. So should specific faculty that are anticipated to be involved at the clinical institutions be identified or named in the application?
That is not necessary. You don't need to get into that level of detail. I think it would be probably helpful to focus more on the types of resources needed to support, the types of research that is of interest. Jessica, anything you would want to add?
Okay, so we're at the conclusion of our webinar, but before I end officially, I just ask our wonderful presenters, Lene and Jessica, are there any closing remarks that you all want to make, especially regarding the wonderful questions that we got? They were really, really great questions that showed that you are keenly interested in this opportunity.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from my perspective, again, I just remind you to pay attention to the FOA specific review language and to ensure that you are looking at the most recently posted version of the FOA, the one that ends in 007. That's it for me.
Yes, I just want to thank everyone for the interest and wonderful questions. I strongly encourage individuals who are thinking about applying to reach out to me well in advance to have a more specific conversation about your application. And it's helpful to also include representatives from your partnering institutions on that call. So if you have not already, please feel free to reach out to me to schedule time to talk in October. And I'm happy to provide more feedback on your specific aims.
Thank you so much. And thank you, our viewing audience, for being here for our webinar today and asking your really